Canon's RF series has been an impressive line of cameras, but one of my personal favorites is the R7. Now, why I like this camera so much? Well, it has in-body image stabilization and it has a much bigger battery, so I can shoot for a lot longer with this camera. It's a little bit pricier than the R100, for example, but if you can spring for it, I would highly recommend it. In this video, I have the 18-150, which is the kit lens for this camera, but check out the link in the description below and I'll list all of my favorite RF lenses that are a little bit wider and a little bit more expensive, but also highly recommend for underwater photography. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now for my kit, I like to add the vacuum valve. This adds a mechanical reinforcement to all the closing mechanisms on the housing, and it also helps me prevent that I didn't forget an O-ring or there's some potential leak. If it's airtight, that means water won't get in. So let's start by adding that valve to the housing. To do so, what we're going to do is take the housing, set it down on its front port mount, and we're going to lift, unlock, and lift each of the lid hooks. Like so. Take the back, set it aside, and you'll notice on the outside you have a 1/2-20 plugged porthole here. What we need to do is remove that port, which is a simple 11/16 wrench, and it'll unthread from the side of your housing. Now, generally speaking, you won't need to use this again, but I'd keep it with your spare parts. You're going to check the sealing surface of that opening to make sure that there's no debris there. We're going to take the vacuum valve. You notice that there's a sealing gasket here and a nut that'll go into the inside of the housing. Remove that nut. You'll take the retainer for the chain that holds the cap. What I like to do is take the button, and then I like to position that so that the chain is just one position away on the hex. And then I will take that and then insert it through. It doesn't thread in, it just goes through to the inside there. And then take the nut, and you're going to want to thread it on from the inside, starting with your fingers. And I get that button position in a place that's convenient for me to access. Tighten it down as much as I can with my fingers, and then I'm going to take a 9/16 wrench from the inside while holding the valve on the outside, and I'm going to snug that up. Now it's important, don't over tighten it. You want to make sure that your gasket on the outside has a good compression. Again, check the outside and make sure you didn't extrude the gasket. In this case, it looks good. Now when we're all said and done, I'll put a vacuum pump on here and I'll show you that process. But let's go ahead and finish up the rest of it. Inside, you're going to notice a camera mount that just slides in. We'll remove that. There's a 1/4-20 screw that corresponds to the 1/4-20 hole on the camera. Line that up with your camera. Take a flat-headed screwdriver and make sure that that gets snugged down to the camera. Don't want to get crazy, but you do want to make sure it's snug. Any movement between the camera mount and the camera will translate to misalignment in the controls. So now you have your camera body here ready to go into the housing, but in this particular case we're shooting the 18-150, which is a rear loading lens. So let's go ahead and prep that and get it ready to go before we install it. Take camera body to the side, set your housing to the side, grab your 18-150 lens. In this case you'll notice that there's a faint writing on that front of the lens that has the designation of the lens itself. Now when you're shooting through a port, light will come in, bounce off those numbers, hit the port, and then come back in, which you can see ghost images of the numbers. So we're going to use an anti-reflection ring here. Now take your time, you only have to do this once. What I like to do is get it started on the far end away from the cut, and then work it from that direction till it goes all the way around the circumference of the lens. And now we've essentially blocked those letters. Now we can take our camera body, take the body cap off, and replace it with the lens. Set that to the side. Let's turn our attention to the housing itself, let's go ahead and put the back on. In order to do that, put the back on, lift the 2 lid snaps over the hooks of the back and push down. And then check to make sure that it's locked in place. Turn the housing so you can see the inside front of the port mount. We're going to take a little bit of Ikelite lubricant, run it on your fingers, and then run that around the O-ring. The lubricant doesn't create the seal, it helps overcome the friction when you put the extension on or the port on. This lets you feel for debris or any hair or anything, so give it a good visual inspection. In this case, for this lens, we're going to start with the extension. Make sure that all 3 thumb screws are backed out and cleared of the inside diameter. And then I like to take my finger and just make sure that the sealing surface here is also clean and free of debris while applying a little bit of that lubricant. Take one of the thumb screws, align it with the top of the housing. Press that into place like so. We're going to take the gear sleeve with the friction pads facing in towards the camera body, and you're going to drop that into the extension. Then you're going to take your zoom dome port, and just like you did with your extension, make sure that the 3 thumb screws are not protruding to the inside diameter, and checking your sealing surface before you put it onto the extension. Take the drive gear and make sure that it's backed out all the way. Now I like to align the shade and the top thumb screw with the thumb screw at the top of the housing. Align the 2 pieces. Press into place. Check that your drive gear is going to drive your gear sleeve. And then what you do is hand tighten each of the thumb screws. If you don't have the pieces all the way pushed together, you'll notice that they aren't bottoming out, meaning that you don't have a piece of push down all the way. But in this case, everything is looking great. Now we're going to take the housing, or flip it back over. We're going to take the back off, just like we did before. Pushing the lever to release the lock, and then up over the lid hook of the back. And in this case, we will take our controls and make sure that they don't interfere with the camera as it slides in. You can take your camera, align the camera mount with the base inside the housing. Slide your hot shoe on. Make sure it's pressed fully forward. And then you will feel the friction pads engaging the lens as you slide the camera in. Realign your back button focus or AF on control. Make sure your other controls are aligning with your camera body. Check this sealing surface here. Make sure you don't have any hair or debris. And check your O-ring. Now this is a compression O-ring, so no lubricant is required for this particular O-ring seal. You do want to make sure it is clean and free of debris. You'll notice that the O-ring always follows an outside curve, meaning that it won't want to pop out on you. And then simply realign your back. Take both of your lid hooks, the lid snaps over the lid hooks, and then simultaneously press down. You'll notice they both lock. To check the lock, try to pull them up, and they will be locked in place. Now the next thing I like to do is add a dual tray and handle. This does a couple things. It gives me a lot more stability in the water, and it provides me with 2 mounting points if I were to add strobes later, which I would. So before we add that tray and handle, we're going to add an extension to the shutter lever and to the back button focus if you want, but for now we'll do just the shutter because it's the same procedure for both. Now in order to do that, you're going to want to loosen both set screws in the shutter lever itself, opposite each other. That'll come off. You'll take the extension and replace the shutter lever with this extension, and then snug it down. And then you're going to take the shutter lever and you're going to place it back on the extension. Now the extension has an octagonal shape. That means that you have several choices of where you can have this lever. I like to position it in a way that'll be comfortable when I'm shooting in the water. So that's going to be probably something like that. And then I'm going to retighten each of the 2 set screws opposite each other. No need to over tighten, but just make sure it's snug. And now we can add our tray and handle. So what I like to do is flip the housing over, take my tray and handle, you'll notice there's 2 quick release buttons on the handle. And those buttons are going to face us when we're using the housing. So make sure that when you put them on there, those buttons are facing you. You'll notice that they extend out here. That's where they push in. So what you're going to do is align that on the bottom of your housing. You're going to take the 2 screws and the 2 shoulder washers. I like to drop them into place. I like to take the flat-headed screwdriver. And I like to get them both started so that it gives me a little bit of play. If you tighten one all the way down, it makes the other one harder to align. But in this case, we are set, good to go. Make sure that is nice and secure to the housing. And technically speaking, at this point, we have a fully assembled waterproof case, but we are going to use the vacuum pump to evacuate the hair on the inside and create a pressure differential. In order to do that, we're going to push the button on the side of the valve, which will release the cap. Like so. I like to take the opportunity, it's a double O-ring seal at this point, and I like to add just a little bit of lubricant to those 2 O-rings because it is a piston seal. And if I keep that lubricated, it makes the cap easier to come in and out. You'll notice it's tethered, so I can't really lose this. And I'm going to replace that cap with the barb of the pump. And then I'm going to pump the housing. And what I'm looking for is not a specific number in general. I'm looking to go to a number and that number maintains. So in this case, I will go to 10 on the pump. And initially, I will look to see that this is staying at 10. If you see there's an immediate drop, it means that something was not assembled correctly or you have a leak somewhere. But in this case, I like to see, okay, I have a 10, I'm sitting at 10, maintaining that pressure differential as of right now. Now, the longer you can let this set, the longer you can see if there's any issues. So what I like to do to make sure that there's not an issue in the pump itself, since I'm not diving with this, is I like to take the pump out and replace it with the cap. I always make it a habit of swapping these things in and out at the same time so that I don't forget. You don't want to go diving without this cap in place. And depending on what your day looks like, if you can get away with at least 15-20 minutes, that's good. If you can let this sit, which I like to do oftentimes is at the end of the day, I put my system together, everything's charged up, I'll take a picture, then I'll create a vacuum in the housing, and then the next morning I can come along, reinsert the pump, and check that the number jumps right back to 10, letting me know that it held that pressure differential all night long. And I don't release that. You're going to want to go diving with the housing under a vacuum. And it's as simple as that. If you have any questions about this assembly, the R7, or any of the products whatsoever, shoot us a comment down below, or feel free to email us at ikelite@ikelite.com.